I've been creating various UK native fish tanks for the past few years now, but one I've always wanted to do is a rock pool tank. But living in Nottingham, which is roughly 70 miles from the sea, either side of the coast, it's not the most ideal location to set one up, but I wasn't going to let a little thing like being landlocked stop me from doing a marine tank. So in this vid, I'll show you how I set up a marine native tank. I put a layer of silver sand into the tank. I prefer to use this for my native setups as silver sand doesn't cloud up the water, and I can add a sprinkling of more natural sand collected from the beach at a later date to make it look more realistic. I then place lots of rocks into the tank and try to create lots of crevices. This is crucial so all the fish and the other creatures that are going into the tank all have their own areas to hide away and they're not competing for space. I'll add some living rocks with algae and seaweeds growing on them closer to putting the fish into the tank at a later date also. Now to the tricky bit. How do I get 158 litres of seawater to one of the most landlocked places in Britain? Well, I could go to the coast and collect it myself, but this would be a lot of hard work, labour intensive, and the nearest bit of coastline to me has some pretty brown, dirty water, which I'm not sure I really want in my tank anyway. The other option is I could mix up my own with some RO water, which I'll come back to later, and some marine salt. But this being my first marine tank, I was really paranoid about not getting the measurements and mixes right. There is, however, another option. That means the water is completely natural and is delivered right to my door, and that's to order from Natural Seawater Supplier, which was a simple and easy process, allowing me to order exactly how much water I need directly to my front door. They normally deal with tropical marine tanks, but there's no reason it doesn't work for a native tank, and it worked perfectly for me, so I can't recommend them enough. It was then a case of getting that water from the containers and into the fish tank, which did take me a while, as there's no way I'm lifting 6 20-litre containers up my stairs, so I did it in stages, but eventually filled the tank up. I got the filter in and got it running, and just like a freshwater tank, let it cycle for a few weeks to allow the filter to build up some friendly bacteria to help clean the water. With the tank ready, it's now time to do the exciting bit, which is catch some critters for the tank. Now you need to really consider a few important things here. It needs to be fish that can happily live in a small area, tolerate relatively warm water, and live with other species, which is why I'm mostly looking at rock pool species, which are perfectly adapted to these factors already. I first went to Cornwall to pick up some rocks which have algae and seaweeds growing on them, which will look really nice in the tank. I was tempted to add seaweed, but the issue with putting lots of it in the tank is that seaweed, as well as releasing oxygen in the day, they also absorb a lot of oxygen at night, which can cause big crashes in O2 levels in the tank. So I opted to not put much in at all. There were 2 main species I wanted to get here, and that was the shanny, which is a staple of any UK native rock pool tank, and another species which is similar called the Montague's blenny. Both live in rock pools and get on well together, both being blennies. I wanted small specimens, so I have a fishing rod with a tiny hook and a net for scooping. The fishing rod ended up being pretty fruitless, but the net was far better way of catching specimens for the tank. I found some periwinkles, which are small snails. I did also see a large snake-like anemone, which I was tempted to put in the tank, but they'll eat anything that goes near them, and I've also been told that when anemones die, they release a lot of nutrients into the tank very quickly, and this can cause problems with the water, so I didn't want to risk that. I ended up with 3 Montague's blennies, the biggest one I've named Elvis, 2 shannies, 2 St. Pyrians crabs, a kind of hermit crab that you only really find in Cornwall on the mainland. I also added limpets, though if I'm honest, the fish made quick work of them. A little porcelain crab also, which I haven't seen since it went in, but they do tend to hide away, so that's no shock. At a later date, I also added brown shrimp, which burrow into the sand, and common shrimp as well, along with a sand goby, common goby, a 2-spot goby, and 3 little mullet. I caught these by using a small shrimp pot which I left in the water for a while and collected up what got trapped. These are thick-lipped mullet which will grow bigger than this tank, so I wouldn't recommend them for long-term inhabitants, but they are great when small as they're quite hardy, and along with the 2-spot goby add some interest higher in the water column as all the other species are bottom dwelling. I had one last addition I wanted, a leopard spot goby. I'd caught these in rock pools before, but every time I tried since I had the tank, I came up empty, until my mate Donny confidently said he could get me a couple in Weymouth. Sure enough, he caught 2 small ones, ideal for the tank, and I met him halfway in Bristol to pick up the fish. These are probably the best looking goby, and I'm chuffed to have a couple in the tank. Picking the right species is crucial for a rock pool tank, as many species won't get on. For example, I generally avoid any kind of large crab. They're just thugs and they'll attack or eat anything they can grab. I've tried to stock fish that are all roughly the same size to avoid any major fights and problems, and thus far I have to say the tank is fairly harmonious. They all seem to get on really well. I wanted to avoid overstocking the tank, so I think this is plenty of fish for it, which helps keep them happy and not biting each other. One thing I will say is people might be a little bit concerned that I'm taking fish from the wild. All the species that I'm taking are not protected, and they're all having a nice happy life. They're getting free healthcare, they're getting food, they're in a safe environment rather than being out in the wild. And to be honest, there's no other alternative. You can't buy native species on the marine market in the UK. So if you want to keep native British marine fish, you have to collect them yourself. The boss of the tank, to my surprise, is the largest Montagu's blenny, Elvis. Now I thought that these were fairly timid, but he's an absolute unit and shoves and knocks the shanies out of the way when it's food time, but without taking chunks out of them. He's become a real favourite of mine. I did get a couple of stowaways with a cushion star turning up and this small sea slug. I'm not sure on the species. Comment down below if you know what kind it is. Both of these stowaways came in on the rocks, I assume. There are species I would have liked, like tompot blennies and corkwing wrasse, which I think would have looked great, but I just couldn't find any the same size as the other fish, and as I mentioned, I don't want them dominating the smaller fish. I did think about adding a top knot, a kind of small flatfish, which I think would have looked great, but they are predatory and it would have definitely eaten all the shrimp, and I'm pretty sure they would only take live food, so I'd have to keep getting it shrimps, which not living near the coast would be a bit of a pain. Other species I'd potentially like would be black-faced blennies, butterfish, and you can even get captive bred native seahorses, which I think would look great. Someone pointed out to me that the filter I have been using has metal components inside, which obviously in salt water is an issue as it will rust and dissolve. The rust releases copper, which isn't necessarily a big issue for the fish, but it will kill any invertebrates. So I switched out the filter for an Interpet PF4 filter, which has ceramics inside, so ideal for saltwater aquariums. I like to add enrichment for the animals also, so I periodically move the odd rock around and add in new shells for them to check out and explore. Cleaning the tank is fairly straightforward. I use a toothbrush to wipe the front glass. I don't mind algae growing on the sides as the shrimp quite like feeding on it. In terms of what I feed these guys, I try to mix it up, but it's mostly a seafood mixture of prawns, squid and mussel with a couple of these a day. If I've been out sea fishing and I have any leftover bait like mackerel or a special treat ragworm, then I'll chuck that in too as they absolutely love it. One interesting thing I noticed is when I first put the rocks in with seaweed and algae on, they were absolutely covered in it, and over the next month they've been completely stripped, which I thought it must have been the shrimps, but it turns out the Montagu's blennies also eat plant matter, which I didn't know, and I think it's a great reason to keep native species, as you learn so much about them when you keep and observe them. Like any aquarium, I still have to do water changes, around 25%, and I have to compensate for evaporation. So with a marine tank, when the water goes down, you don't simply add more salt water, as you'll be higher the salt content. When the water evaporates, the salt remains. So to avoid the tank getting very high salt levels, you top it up every now and then with RO water, which is highly purified water. This is also available from natural seawater suppliers, so thanks for sending that over. Now, I always get asked this in any native fish aquarium video that I do, and that is, do I have a chiller? And the short answer is no. I've set this tank up in September, so my house is cooler. The current temperature of the tank is around 18 Celsius. I wouldn't really want it to go over 25 Celsius for the fish to be comfortable, and bear in mind most of these fish are exposed to warmer conditions in rock pools. Mullet love warm water, both of the blennies do really well in warm water, and the hermit crabs also like it warm. So I've tried to be practical in the species I've chosen. If I had a chiller, it would open the door to cold water species like eel pout, butterfish and rockling. My current plan is to rehome the fish to Bristol Aquarium in the spring, as although I think they'd be fine over the summer, I wouldn't want to risk a warm summer wiping them out. So if you visit the aquarium, you may well see my fish. I hope you enjoyed this vid, and as always, the tank will be empty in the spring. So what should I do next? My thoughts are maybe a stickleback tank. I could stick with marine and add warm water species, or perhaps a pond tank with lots of critters and fish in there. Let me know your thoughts. Thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed it. If you enjoyed this vid, why not check out this other video right here? If you can, please subscribe to the channel, only takes a couple of seconds and it really helps me out. I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers.